Yes, yes. I think thinking really has to deal with our relationship with reality and the universe and the world around us. This is the Piaget idea, is that you build up all these physical experiences. Let's say, for example, um, you lift your arm up. At the very beginning, your body isn't, you don't consider it part of you yet. It's sort of just
Mm.
an object of exploration like anything else. And you're discovering things about it. You realize that it has weight, it can fall, that it can feel pain, and it can pick up objects. And all of this is the precursors to thinking. And when thinking is connected to that concrete experience, um, it becomes a very, very, you start to understand what its its function really is in life, and that is to to have you come into relationship with the things and the things around you, and how to navigate and interact with people's objects and things like this. So yes, this is thinking. And I'll tell you, there's a very fascinating book that really inspired me in my work. It's a book by Goethe. He's the German literist, but he also was a scientist. He did something about colors, and he made a book where he made all the observations that you feel when you look at colors. So if you look at a bright light and you look at a dark place, you'll see the image of that light in that place.
Mm.
And all of these things, um, he has like 800 observations, and each one of them you can do now. Like, it's everybody experiences the same thing. We experience it slightly different. We might have more powerful eyes, less powerful eyes. Um, but we all experience these things. And I feel like all of this, like, raw data that we start with is really, again, thinking, body mind. This is why we call it body mind. It's like this primal place where we make all our connections together.
Yeah. Do you recall the name of the book?
Yes, it's the theory of colors.
Okay. For anyone that's listening that might be interested, the theory of colors. I'll have a link in the show notes so that people can refer to that if they feel like it. Okay. So
Uh,
thinking, go ahead.
well, I just wanted to say that, um, from a pragmatic point of view, people who are going through that process where they're going through rehabilitation after brain injury are going to find these similar things that everyone goes through, just like in this book. And I think this is really fascinating. They're going to have to learn about how their body is aware. They're going to have to hook into how to initiate, what does it mean to have that spark where a movement starts again, or a function of your brain starts to get back online. All of these is part of this body mind process where everything is starting at the basic thing of thinking and feeling and moving.
So in that case, does acquired brain injury from either a trauma to the head or a stroke or something along those lines, does that uh, unlearn does that has that made us unlearn a method or a process of thinking, and therefore is part of what you do helping people relearn the somatic version of thinking?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So, for example, one of the things I sent you was a video of Dylan. He's a
Yes.
16-year-old boy, and he had exactly this problem. He had gotten to a point where he had the brain injury, but there were certain things that he couldn't solve. There was a tremoring that was starting to happen. It was stopping all his functions, and he could literally not grab onto objects and so forth. And he had plateaued out. And in order uh, to overcome that tremoring, he had to re-examine pretty much everything. He had to re-examine first, just the physical part of his situation, but he had to find out his relationship to pain. He had to figure out that a lot of what he was doing was to focus on, sort of, he's very much into sports, so he was focused on the competitive nature of sports. And he had to understand that in order for him to heal, he can't be worried about other bodies and competing with it, but he has to know himself first. And that process became very, very important. And he also had to relearn how to, what it meant to have confidence in himself. What does that mean? Normally we measure it by what we can do. But in the case of brain injury, we can't do that much at the very beginning. And so it had more to do with self-understanding, had to do more with just like learning, hey, the way I'm going to feel good about myself and confident about myself is to know what makes me tick, how I process things. And so, yeah, he basically had to relearn a lot of those things. And that's part of the healing process, not just a bunch of exercise he has to do, but he has to kind of re-examine who he is as a person. And so he is sort of reinventing himself as a thinker,
Mm.
as a feeler, as a mover, everything.
It's identity level,
Yes, exactly.
relearning.
Absolutely.
Okay. So immediately, because I did watch Dylan's story and I thought it's amazing. And Dylan was injured in a car accident. He had his head damaged. As a result of that, he had some deficits, and those deficits seem to be progressing to getting worse. And I think that's somewhere around the time where the family got involved to the next level and interacted with you. And basically seemed to you seemed in my mind to decrease the strength of the neural patterns for tremor and increase the neural patterns for not tremor.
Exactly. Exactly. It was a very interesting situation. Basically, what was happening is that he was on a drug to just calm his nervous system. Um, and then what happened was he went off that drug, and all of a sudden he started getting this tremor in his hand, and that tremor just kept getting increasing, increasing, increasing. And it got to the point again that when he would reach for objects, he would literally just knock it over. He couldn't close his hand. He couldn't grab it, and it was causing him the problem. It was sort of his stopper that was stopping all the progress on all these different levels.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, when he was dealing with that situation, there were lots of dimensions there. And this is what you find in body mind stuff is that there's not just the physical aspect, the neurological aspect of it. There's something in the brain that's not working. But there's all these circumstances that create that thing. And one of them, for example, was social shame. He didn't want people to see him. So he would hold his hand and kind of like try to restrain it. It was kind of like the more he held it, the more that energy buildup would happen. And so he was kind of creating this feedback because he didn't want to move his hand. So that was one thing. The other thing that was happening is that there were lots of pockets of pain in his body that hadn't been released. And his body was kind of being triggered by these things. And he had been living with the pain for so many years that he kind of didn't know that it existed. So there was a pain part that was also happening. And then there was also the thing that was the most interesting, maybe, was that he was trying to learn how to move his body from using this part of his brain, the frontal lobe stuff, the thinking part of his thing. So he was trying to will his hand to do it. But moving happens from a much more primitive part of your brain. It starts from the cerebellum and your spinal cord. It's coming from a more unconscious part. And you kind of have to let your body do it. And this was the biggest thing that he had to learn, that in order to go back to moving, he couldn't do it through his head. He had to really tune into his body and kind of relax, calm down, feel, not be afraid of looking at pains in his body and just working all that out before he could actually then start to really realize what it meant to control his body.
Mm. Uh, it's counterintuitive
Mm.
because he had to not think to move his body. He had to just do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
In fact,
thinking,
meditation.
yeah,
Yeah.
because thinking about it, perhaps in the head-based thinking, not the somatic version of the thinking we've already discussed. Thinking about it is basically overcomplicating it in my mind. It sounds to me like if I have to think about moving, when I had to learn how to walk again, it was so difficult to do. It was so draining, so energy sapping that I couldn't sustain it for a long time anyway. I had to have
Mm.
faith in my legs' ability to give the feedback to me and my brain so that when it was on the ground, even though it felt different, I had to believe and trust in the fact that it was on the ground, and the feedback that it was giving me was it was a new language, but it was feedback nonetheless that it was on the ground. And then that, therefore, that released the tendency of my knee to overcompensate, and also created a situation where if my knee wasn't overcompensating, it also wasn't undercompensating because my knee
Mm.
would buckle. And as a result of that, I started to feel and understand the way that my leg was now responding, rather than trying to think about how it was responding and looking at my leg uh, falling at my foot, uh, uh, landing on the ground, and then wondering whether or not I had it in the right position or not. So I kind of had to learn visually what the position of the foot, knee, and leg were when they were in the quote unquote correct position. And then once I visualized that and knew what it looked like, I had to believe that my body was doing it and risk falling over and risk injuring it, even though that what would not have been the best outcome. It would have been a learning opportunity to say, okay, I have to make an adjustment and allow for that thing that caused me to lose my balance, trip over, my knee to buckle, or my knee to overextend, or my hip to give way.